Let's get back to Team Talk on ESPN Radio 1017, The Team. We are taking your calls at 994-1017. That's 994-1017. Now, Team Talk on ESPN Radio 1017, The Team.
Welcome back to Team Talk. Joe O'Neill here with you until 5:30, and then we'll go to the pregame show for tonight's Game 3 of the World Series. Series tied at 1 apiece, Rays and Dodgers later on tonight. Also wanted to thank Brett Okamoto with ESPN regarding tomorrow's huge UFC 254 contest. But joining us now is Travis Wilson. I was thumbing through the Albuquerque Journal sports page today, and they had a little blurb about a study that took place in Wisconsin, and it revealed some interesting information regarding the high school sports participation and how it relates to increased risk of COVID-19. The story was, the report was published by Dr. Drew Watson. He's a team physician for the University of Wisconsin Athletics Department and member of the Department of Orthopedics and Rehabilitation at the University of Wisconsin. And the folks over at wizsports.net, that's WISSPORTS.net. They're the number one high school sports website in Wisconsin and one of the top 5 independent high school sports websites in the country. Joining us now is the general manager, Travis Wilson. And Travis, you guys did a recap story on the results of that study, and pretty interesting stuff, huh, Travis?
Yeah, it is. There's been a big discussion, not only in Wisconsin, but across the country about, what is the impact of high school sports and participating in high school sports on the current state of the pandemic. And, in some places, obviously, high school sports are going on. Here in Wisconsin, our fall sports are underway. As I think you mentioned, New Mexico is one of the few states that's not underway right now. So there's a lot of different, ways that states are going about it. And there hasn't been a lot of information, concrete information to support things one way or another. And this study is looking to fill in that gap. And what they did is they worked with the state association here in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Interscholastic Athletic Association, and they did a study and collected data from over 200 schools in the state, representing more than 30,000 student athletes, accounting for about 16,000 practices, 4,000 games and competitions during the month of September of this year. And they asked all those schools to submit information on COVID-19 infections and positive rates. And what they found is out of 30,000 athletes at 207 schools, they identified 271 cases of COVID-19 positive tests. And the case rate, if you look at that, the per 100,000 population, that is actually below the overall case rate for the average 14 to 17-year-old in the state of Wisconsin based on information from the Department of Health Services. The incidence rate was lower as well. And so it gives finally some concrete information to the question of, does high school sports, contribute to the spread of COVID-19? Again, the main output of this study and what they said is that participation in sports is not associated with increased risk of COVID-19 spread among Wisconsin high school student athletes. Interestingly enough, or part of that as well, they asked them, were there any hospitalizations, deaths, anything like that? Out of those 271 cases, no hospitalizations, no deaths, which is outstanding news, obviously. They also asked them if they had done a contact tracing and were able to determine the source of that positive test. And about 209 of those, they were able to determine a known source. And of those, only one was from a sports contact, playing sports and catching it, from a teammate or in sports. The majority of them were household contacts. There were some, quite a few community contacts, only a few attributed to school contact. And so, if you're somebody that wants to see high school sports played right now, this study is supportive of the idea that if you do things the right way, and they did ask, and there are restrictions in place in our state, there are guidelines from the state association, from local health departments, All of these places had a mitigation plan in place. If you do things the right way, you can run sports in a fashion that does not contribute to spread of COVID-19 is kind of the basis of this study. And it certainly caught a lot of people's attention, as you mentioned.
No doubt about it. We're talking with Travis Wilson. He's with wissports.net on the Daniels Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Cool Take Hotline. And Travis did a story about the study that the University of Wisconsin put together that suggested participation in high school sports is not associated with increased risk of COVID-19. And yes, that is correct, Travis. New Mexico is not allowing any high school sports in 2020, so it's going to be 2021 before they play any high school sports in the state of New Mexico. And I believe the information I've gotten lately is we're only one of 4 states remaining that are not having any high school sports at all in 2020, the others being Washington State, California, and Hawaii. This is ESPN Radio 1017, The Team. So, Travis, just to reiterate again, the number of people that were studied in this, it wasn't a small sample size. We're talking 30,000 student athletes.
Right, and they were able to collect that data from the schools in cooperation with the state association. It was kind of a little bit of a joint venture there, because again, people wanted to know, what the data said, and there hadn't really been anything like that. So it was done the right way. It's done by researchers that have published studies many times before. In fact, they had a study out earlier this year, the same group that looked at what the sports closures of this spring and school shutdowns did to the mental health of young people in our state. And they surveyed about 3,000 young people, student athletes in Wisconsin, high school student athletes. And at that time, they showed, there was really substantial negative impacts on the mental health, the physical well-being, the activity levels of student athletes. And so that was something that they came out with earlier this year. And then they transitioned to this study to see, what is offering high school sports doing to schools. And also interesting to note that here in Wisconsin, there are some schools that are being conducted in person. There are some schools that are being done virtually still. It just varies by school district. And they did not find any significant difference in the case rate or the positive rate for students that were in school full-time or students that were virtual for full-time. So that was another kind of interesting part of that study.
Yeah, I that's why there's no doubt that this study can really only be categorized as a groundbreaking study, and it's from researchers at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. It has not only 30,000 student athletes that were studied, but 207 different schools and a bunch of practices and a bunch of games. As you mentioned. Another thing that was pointed out is that there was no particular sport that seemed to be of any higher risk than other sports, Travis.
Right, and that was, I think of interest too, especially as we start transitioning to the winter sports season where those sports are held inside. If you think about the fall sports, at least that we offer here in Wisconsin, most of them are outside. Girls golf, girls tennis, football, boys soccer, most of the cross country, they're mostly outside. The only indoor sport that we have right now is volleyball. And it was interesting to note that, as you said, the case rates and the positive rates really weren't any different between the sports. You would think that a sport like football or soccer, where you have closer contact in practice, in games, would have a higher incidence. And there's different guidelines that have been in place, but they didn't find that to be the case so far. It would be interesting to see this study represented again with winter sports to see if that changes the dynamic. When you think about basketball players, very, very close contact for an extended period, wrestlers that are in close contact for an extended period potentially, if the same results would bear out. That's kind of the next piece to the puzzle.
Well, certainly everything is not perfect. And we heard that from Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, and, all the guys from the NFL and the MLB, like the decision to try to get these games to be able to have these games. They said it's not going to be perfect. And, just from looking at your website and your Twitter handle, some games have been canceled in the state of Wisconsin. Everything has not been perfect, correct?
Correct. And we expected that. That was, it was never an expectation that everything was going to go perfectly and there were going to be no hiccups. Now, what we have found is that the majority of the games that have been canceled, and we've been tracking it closely for football, which is obviously the big ticket, high interest sport. About 20% of the games in any given week have been canceled here in Wisconsin. But the majority of them have not been because, a team had a positive test or, an issue on the team. Most of them have actually been at the school and community level. And if people in New Mexico have been following the news, they've probably seen that, Wisconsin is a significant COVID hotbed right now with many of the top outbreak locations in the country. And so a lot of schools have preemptively, out of an abundance of caution, moved to virtual instruction for a few weeks, and some of them have canceled sports because of that. And it's because of, rates in the community, in the area, maybe the rates at their school. But most of the time, it has not been because of a outbreak or a positive case on a team. And in fact, if there is a positive case, it's usually just one. I'm not aware of any significant, outbreaks of multiple infections on any of the teams in the state. There could be that we just don't know about, because obviously there's some things that are, fall under privacy rules and whatever else. But for the most part, the issues have been at the school and community level, not at the team level.
Right. And another thing, too, and you hate to hear about anybody testing positive for COVID-19, but according to the article that you guys, or the story that you wrote summarizing this study, there have been no hospitalizations at this point either, thank goodness, right, Travis?
Correct. And that kind of mirrors what a lot of the existing literature has been, and this is they mentioned this in the study, that the severity of COVID-19 is less for young people, and especially children and those under the age of 18. They have found, that to be the case in this study as well. And by the way, the results they got from this study actually mirror very closely another study that they had done in the youth soccer realm in a club soccer league. I believe it was in California. They had worked with a youth soccer club out there with several thousand participants, and the results that they got in terms of no increase of positive rates or anything like that was the same that they got in that youth soccer study. And it's important to note that nobody is saying this proves that sports are safe, right? That's not what this study is saying. What the study is saying is that playing sports at the high school level is no more risky than living life in general for the average 14 to 17-year-old.
Or even, Travis, people that are going to school virtually, there seems to be no difference at all. If anything, people that, at this point, according to the study, people that are going to school virtually actually have a higher incidence, which is going to surprise a ton of people, Travis.
Yeah, and, that's been a lot of discussion here in the state of, if kids are not in school and if they're not doing sports, it's not like they're sitting at home for 24 hours out of the day. They're still going out and living their life and doing things, getting together with friends and whatever else. So it's not like if you don't play sports and if you cancel sports in your community, kids are just going to shut down and do nothing. They're still going to be out, doing things that could potentially expose them to the virus. And that was a big part of the conversation when the state association was determining, are we going to do fall sports? How are we going to do it? What are we going to do with them? There was a lot of considerations that went into it, including that idea, again, that, kids are going to be kids and they're going to go out and do things. Also the idea that if you don't offer fall sports, if you don't offer a sports program, they're going to find a way to play. And that will push them to a club opportunity or an AAU or whatever you want to call it,
right,
where it varies on what their level of guidelines and protocols are. Whereas if you could do it through the school, they felt that you could do it in a safer environment where there was more protocols in place, there were guidelines in place that would reduce the risk. Nobody uses the word safe. Nobody should use the word safe because there's risk in anything, but you can reduce the risk and mitigate the risk. And that's what they felt they could do through the schools, through school-based athletics, and continue to provide, a high level of athletic opportunities and all the great benefits that go with it. It's not something that, again, nobody is using the word safe. Everybody is using the word reducing risk, and that's what they have found so far. And the other part of it, too, the athletes know that they could get shut down at any time. And so they are taking precautions. They are being careful. They are, doing what they have to do to get their season in. Many of them were spring sport athletes that had their season canceled, and they don't want to see that happen again. So they're being probably more cautious, to be quite honest with you, and are probably safer than the average kid that's not in sports, that isn't, looking out for their health and their safety necessarily as much. And again, that might be part of why the case rate and the infection rate is actually a little bit lower for student athletes than it is for the average high school age population.
We're speaking with Travis Wilson. He's the general manager of the Wisconsin Sports Network. You can find this study at wissports.net, WISSSPORTS.net. It's the number one high school sports website in Wisconsin and one of the top 5 independent high school sports websites in the entire country. Before I let you go, Travis, I want to kind of circle back to the front end of this when you were talking about the toll it's taken on the mental health. I mean, you were a 3-sport high school athlete yourself up there in Wisconsin. You're in the mix with these high schools, these student athletes, and a lot of parents. So, talk a little bit about the toll that it is taking on some of these 14 to 17-year-old kids that you're around so much, if you would, please, Travis.
Yeah, and again, the same group that did this study did a study back in June looking at exactly that question, the mental health and, the anxiety levels and everything like that. And they studied over 3,000 participants back then. And the nice thing about it, they had done some concussion studies where they had looked at, mental health and anxiety and depression as it relates to concussion. So they kind of had a baseline of information from the past. And based on 3,000 participants in this study they did, 65% of those kids reported anxiety, 25% reported moderate to severe anxiety. Everything across the board, when you looked at anxiety, depression levels, all of those things were significantly higher than what they ever had been. The overall psychosocial health score decreased significantly. Their overall health number decreased. Their physical activity was down 50%. It was just kind of eye-opening, the toll that it had taken on kids. And I've had a chance to talk to a lot of them. We've interviewed kids for features on our sites and talked to them about what all this has done. And you understand it. It's just sports, right?
Right.
But at the same time, it's not just sports for a lot of these kids. They've invested a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of resources, going back years and years to build to what they thought was going to be, a senior season of baseball or basketball or football or whatever it might be. And to have that opportunity taken away from them, no matter what we think it should do to them, there's no doubt that it is affecting them mentally. And it's been really, encouraging to see a lot of the kids get back to it this fall. They've had a chance to get back on the football field, on the soccer field, on the volleyball court, and you can see, the positive impact that is having on those student athletes. It's also having a wonderful positive impact on their schools, on their communities. Getting back to some semblance of normalcy, and obviously high school athletics are a big part of a lot of communities. It's a great rallying point, a great rallying cry, and a great way for the community to support the young people. And you can see that positive impact it's having in some of these communities. Yeah,
and we're hearing a lot of that same thing here in Albuquerque, or in New Mexico, I should say. It is important, that it's not like you guys, the people in Wisconsin that they did these studies with threw caution to the wind. The study reported that 100% of the schools participating in this study had a formal plan in place to mitigate risk associated with COVID-19 and its spread. The common mitigation strategies included player/staff symptom monitoring, face mask use by staff, face mask use by players off the field, increased facility disinfection, and much more. So, these all. They're being as careful as they can, and obviously probably the results of this have all tied into that. And another thing of importance too, Travis, is that the group that did this study did it in hopes that it can contribute to the ongoing discussions about the return to play risk benefits of playing sports during this period, so on and so forth. But of course, the headline is the University of Wisconsin study results suggest participation in high school sports is not associated with increased risk of COVID-19. And people, you can find this study at wissports.net. And Travis Wilson, general manager of Wisconsin Sports Network, thanks for joining us here in Albuquerque, man. We appreciate you.
Yeah, you bet. Hopefully, we can help provide some additional context of what's happening here in Wisconsin and in some other places, and maybe some folks can use that down in New Mexico to try to get things going again.
Thank you so much. We're certainly getting the word out there, that's for sure. Again, Travis Wilson, General Manager, Wisconsin Sports Network. All right, that's the show. It's time for the pregame show of Game 3 of tonight's World Series. Thank you for listening to Team Talk on ESPN Radio 101.7, The Team.